In chapter 17, so we got, if we back up just a little bit, we can kind of get some context here. We have the 7 bowl / plagues of chapter 16. And we might think that John's dream or his vision might come to an end here because in chapter 15, it calls these the last judgments of God, like the very last ones. But the vision doesn't end in 16, it keeps on going. And so what follows then in chapter 17 and 18 is the story. Think of it this way, it's a theological story of empire. This is a theological account of empire and empire's destruction. So what I'm trying to say is that this is the story of Babylon's destruction as told from God's perspective on things. And so whether I say Rome or Babylon or the harlot, they all meet this really gruesome death at the hands of the very beast that she is riding. Right? That's what's going to happen at the end of this chapter. So the death of this great city Babylon is then described, if we look in the next chapter, chapter 18, sort of as this funeral song. And the kings are wailing over how great she was. And there's this mourning going on, and there's merchants and kings and all the seafaring people, all these people that bring wildly different goods than we would have that are so valuable. All these people whose livelihood depended on Rome's appetite for that extravagance, right? These people were bringing these expensive things to Rome because the Romans wanted all these nice things at the expense of their fellow man. And so chapter 17 and 18 are sort of spelling out in detail what the 7th bowl of judgment is all about. And it's spelling it out in terms of another big event in history that happened. Stop, Elizabeth. Sit. No, you don't growl. You understand? Do you want to go down with Mom? Okay. Chapter 17 and 18 are defining or drawing this picture for us in terms of the Exodus. And so just like in Exodus 14, when we're told the story of judgment on Pharaoh and judgment on Egypt, and then the story is retold in the next chapter by a song, the results here of 17 and 18 are very similar, even though they're not called a song in chapter 18. You have this sort of wailing and gnashing of teeth in 18 that's reminiscent of that. And so God's people are set free in Egypt to go and worship out from under the evil and the oppression. And here, again, they are set free from the evil and the oppression. And the purpose in both instances is so that they can go and worship God. And so John is using this narrative structure of Exodus, but he's using the words of the prophets of Israel. So this is multi-layered. This is the multi-layered part. He's structuring it like the Exodus account, but he's using the words of the prophets. And so these chapters are very, very, very deeply rooted in the prophets of Israel and their critiques of the original Babylon. So if we look in Isaiah 23, in Isaiah 24, Isaiah 27, Jeremiah 50, Jeremiah 51. In fact, Jeremiah 51 is very close to being quoted here, although John doesn't ever quote, per se, a single scripture. He uses the same pictures that are right in the same events that are going on. And Ezekiel 26 also through 28. So, these prophets critiqued Babylon for its idolatry, for its violence, and for its lavishness, its over-the-top luxury, at the cost of other people. So I wanted to bring out 7 points. I printed them off for you. This is out of a book. This is not, scripture or anything. And they're a little bit different on the slide behind me. They're a little bit simplified on the slide behind me, so if you want to follow along there, it might be easier. The book is called Reading Revelation Responsibly. It's a great book, and it presents the 5 major methods there are for reading Revelation. One of them is reading Revelation as a timeline, series of events. This is telling the future. And all the way to, on the other end of things, reading everything in Revelation symbolically. Nothing actually happened, and this is just a lesson for us. The truth is almost always somewhere in between, right, on those sorts of things. So let's jump to the main conclusion of the lesson here for chapter 17. I want to jump to this conclusion first so that we can then put on the glasses and see what's actually happening in the story. So, John wants us to understand this hyper-symbolic language that he's trying to use. He even goes so far as to explain himself. And this is one of the few times in the book he actually will explain himself. And so he wants us to know that empire, this Babylon, this woman, is a system of domination that seduces the powerful and intoxicates the common people. This is right out of verse 2 of chapter 17. And these 7 attributes of empire are true throughout time. The second one is that empire, by its very definition, would like to be, even if it is not, would like to be territorially grand. It would like to make itself bigger. And ideologically, that means its mode of operation, its ideas, it wants everybody to agree with them. It makes claims about itself that are only rightly made by God, such as this person is the savior of the people, things like that. And the third one is that empire presents itself as pleasing and full of benevolence, full of gifts, full of benefits for people who pledge allegiance to the empire. But this appearance of looking good really masks the abominations that are at the very essence of that imperial character that are underneath the surface. Because the imperial character doesn't care what you think, actually. They just want you to serve them, right? That's what they're looking for. And so why is Babylon judged? Why is Babylon judged? Human empire, the empires that humans make, is judged for, essentially for multiple forms of idolatry and injustice. And those are the 2 main, we went through Isaiah. Remember when we went through Isaiah? The 2 main critiques of the prophets were idolatry and injustice. You didn't take care of the poor, not the weak, the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the stranger or foreigner in some translations. And so that little critique there of the injustice is used like 70 or 90 times throughout the prophets. It's a refrain. It comes in over and over. And they'll say, and Babylon did such and such and such and such, and these people suffered, the poor, the such and such, and the such and such. So, this happens, though, not just in the prophets. This is a pattern that continues throughout all of humanity, throughout all of the Bible here, from the prophets to Jesus, to Paul, right on through to Revelation. And so Babylon is guilty of sins against God. Babylon is guilty of sins against people and against the earth as well. I don't have time to get into that, but Romans chapter 8, the earth cries out because of the things that it had been done against it. It engages in this sort of corporate corruption. Babylon engages in this corporate corruption. It's the whole kit and caboodle is corrupt. And so Babylon makes promises and demands, and it claims that are only appropriate for God to make. It makes its own power seem like it's sacred and makes its own power seem like it's divine, right? Because what we are doing, God is on our side, right? So therefore, we have God's power behind us. Those are the claims that Babylon makes. And then it will require absolute allegiance to those claims, right? So if God is... You need to listen to what she says. Babylon makes promises and demands of that absolute power that they have. They claim the absolute power and they demand allegiance to that power. And so Revelation is going to make chapter 18, the next chapter is going to make it really clear that the pursuit of luxury and the neglect, or at the neglect and the expense of the poor, is evil. And this is going to happen first by Babylon themselves, but also its own client kings, the kings that are associated with it, okay? Even the everyday citizens that are associated with it. And so despite these claims to divine status, right, this empire is always ultimately, number 4, opposed to the true God. And so empire will resort to anything necessary, including lethal violence, to silence those people who oppose it. So if you stand for God, there is always the possibility that lethal violence will be used to censor you. Because you're pro-God, because you're counter-imperial, because you're a witness for the Lamb and for truth. And so as empires grow, they grow in part because of the people they conquer give in. They acquiesce. Verse 13. 17 and verse 13. These kings, these are the kings, are of one mind, and they hand over their power to the authority of the beast. So part of the way empires grow is because we give in. And so if we are anti-imperial, if we are against those empires growing, then we won't give them our own power. And so one inevitable result of the treatment of the poor treatment of human beings is that eventually you will begin to see them as goods that then can be traded. And of course, I'm referring to the slave trade. But going beyond that, then you will see the elimination of other humans as good because they didn't offer absolute allegiance to the kingdom, or because other humans did not put in their allegiance to the king, and so it didn't help you, and so you need to remove them out of the way. Another outcome that might come out of this is violence and war and death and destruction and hunger and famine as a result of those things. And if you'll notice, I did them in that order because that is the reverse order of the 4 horsemen, right? We have, it is the order of the 4 horsemen. We have expansionist, imperialist people that want to make the empire bigger, and so they go and they conquer others. And there's war and death and destruction involved in that. And then, as a result, hunger and famine come out of that. That's what the 4 horsemen are all about. This insatiable appetite for more and more and more, conquering more and more power. This is what the beast and the harlot is all about. And the final result is inevitable, though. It's the destruction of the earth without any sort of fear of consequences, whether that's humans, whether that's the land, whether that's the good things that God has given us, without any sort of consequence, because they believe that they are God. So if we combine all these attributes, it gives us the 7 features of empire that we've talked about here. And the author of the book, his name is Michael Gorman, and it's Reading Revelations Responsibly. And I would encourage you to look at that book. One other thing I wanted to bring up, just because we talked about it in class and I didn't talk about it here yet, is number 6. Empires will eventually die of self-inflicted wounds. Rome was not conquered by a single army. Most large empires are not conquered by a single army. That's not how it works. They die from within. They die from the evil that is from within. All right, so let's actually talk about Revelation chapter 17 now. So we have one of these angels who had just given out the bowl plagues. You know, to me, it seems like John is trying to tell us that the 7th angel, the same one who gave out the destruction, is the same one, but, you know, it's not overtly said. So one of these bowl angels now invites John to view the punishment that's going to be poured out on this notorious harlot with whom the kings of the earth have committed adultery, and those adulteries have intoxicated inhabitants of the earth. So, John is taken into the desert by the Spirit, and John sees this nauseous-looking prostitute on a red 7-headed beast. And in her hand is a golden cup. It's a vision of opposites. We have this gold that is supposed to be so beautiful, but the gold cup is filled with the filth of her adulteries. It's mixed with blood. And her ultimate sin is that she has gorged herself. At the end of the chapter, we see the blood running down her face because she has gorged herself on the blood of God's people. And it's still running down her face. This is fresh. She is the one who is responsible for the suffering and the bloodshed that's occurring during the time John is writing these things. During the, most likely, the persecution of Domitian, the Emperor Domitian. And so the same language is used of Babylon in ancient times. If we notice the language that Jeremiah uses, let's look at Jeremiah real quick, chapter 51. Jeremiah chapter 51. Jeremiah 51, 7 through 8. Jeremiah 51, verse 7 through 8 says, Babylon has been a golden cup, in the hand of Yahweh, in the hand of the Lord, intoxicating all the earth. The nations have drunk her wine. Therefore, Elizabeth, the nations have drunk her wine, therefore the nations are going mad. Suddenly, Babylon was fallen and had been broken. Wail over her, bring balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. This is a direct image of what's happening here in Revelation. This language that's applied to Babylon, John is now applying to Rome, the city that's on 7 hills, we're going to find out. But it can be applied to any other empire at any other time period in time. Whether we're going to talk about the United Kingdom, UK, in the 18th century and the 19th century, or we're going to talk about the United States. We're going to see a much more clear link to modern empires next week because we will see the actual sins that they're guilty of. And then we can kind of relate to those. And so John gives an explanation of what's going on. And the angel tells John in verse 7 now of chapter 17, he tells him, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman. We need to stop and talk about this word mystery. This word mystery does not mean that it's not understood. In fact, The word mystery, when it's used in the Bible, is quite the opposite. It means it was mysterious, and now I'm explaining it to you. Now, we may not always understand every aspect, like in this chapter, but the angel is making an attempt to explain it to John here. So, the angel tells John the mystery of the woman and the beast, and he's not left to wonder about these things. And so it's important to keep in mind, again, that what we're told is not intended to conceal information, but to reveal information about the woman and about the beast. And so clarity is being given to the reader and to John. So let's move and see what some of this clarity is. We have 7 hills that are represented by 7 heads, or 7 heads that are represented by 7 hills on which the woman sits. No problem there, right? Really? Because everybody in the ancient world knew that Rome was established on 7 hills. It was part of their founding myth that those hills were represented by certain figures that were buried there in the ancient times, certain gods. But the 7 kings, who are these 7 kings? Well, they could be Roman emperors. They could be starting with Augustus, but why do we start with Augustus? Seems fairly arbitrary. We could start with Julius, but most scholars start with Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, who was emperor during Jesus' time period, and Nero. Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, Nero. And these 7 kings stand for the apparent perfection of this kingdom, with this 8th king, even though he's part of the 7 who will appear to take the kingdom forward into a new day. He's going to make it great again, this 8th king. But instead, he's going to lead to the destruction of the nation, the Babylon. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is we don't need to match up the emperors precisely. What matters is that the monster's kingdom looks perfect. It looks impregnable. It looks like the country we live in, right? Modern day America, the greatest military power in the world. It looks impregnable, but forces from within will destroy it. Because John wasn't expecting us to make the sort of identification with certain Roman emperors. Let me bring the emperors back in. I apologize, I got my notes out of order there. They could start with Augustus, Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, and then Nero. But the problem is there were 3 emperors who all served less than a few months each. And their names were Galba, Otho, and, funny, Vitellius, which means like life. Not so much. He didn't live very long. And then the 6th one after that would be, if we don't count those 3, is Vespasian. That should sound familiar, because Vespasian sends his son Titus to take care of the Jewish uprising in 70 AD. And so in 70 AD, Titus, the son, takes the kid gloves off. That's where the saying comes from. I'm taking the kid gloves off. Taking the kid gloves off, and we are going to go and fight like men. It's no longer going to be a boxing match. It's going to be destruction for them. That would bring us to Domitian being the 8th king, which is about the time I believe that Revelation was written. Now, if your head is spinning at this point, it may not be because you didn't pay attention in history class or because you're slow. That's not the reason why. The reason your head is spinning is because John probably wasn't expecting us to make those sort of identifications. I already explained it in the last slide. I apologize, my notes got all mixed up. But the 7 kings stand for the perfection of this monstrous kingdom. Yes, he would have been pointing to Rome and the 7 emperors, but the point is that this applies to every other day also. And so now there's going to be 10 kings that John mentions, and they give their allegiance to the beast also. And we're going to find out in verse 16. Verse 16. Not answering questions right now, Neil. After we're done, maybe. And then 10 horns that you saw, they will hate. They and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will turn in self-destruction against each other, destroying Babylon or Rome in this case, and destroying each other. And so John is describing the self-destroying power of evil. And so the wicked are not this happy band of brothers, right? That's not what they are. Because they are wicked, they give in to jealousy. Because they are wicked, they give in to hatred. So that their own mutual hatred of each other results in their own mutual destruction. And so this is the story of Rome. But this will be our own story also. Elizabeth, back up a little bit. Okay. There you go. Not right on top of her. Okay. This is the story of Rome, and it will be our story also. Our country is destined to be destroyed from within. There's no political leader that can fix it. Only turning our allegiance from the donkey or from the elephant to the lamb can cure the problem of evil. And so the lamb, we find out here, will conquer them. Just one simple line. They will make war with the lamb, and the lamb will conquer them. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called chosen and faithful. One line, and the whole story is done with. The lamb is going to conquer this beast with 7 heads. He's going to conquer the 10 kings because he is King of kings and Lord of lords. And the lamb will conquer them by the same method that he has always conquered with. The lamb will conquer with his own blood. And by the blood of his own. That's you and me. We are the martyrs, the witnesses who remain faithful. He will not conquer by the sword. He will not conquer by the atomic bomb. He will not conquer by intimidation. That's not how the lamb works. And so all of this might seem really complex beyond the point of like comprehension or understanding, right? But I think there's one last and really overarching or overriding lesson for us, the church, right now. And I think I want to make it really clear. And that is that brutal but very seductive civilizations or national empires or nations, they snare us. They snare humanity into believing in the lies of the promises of luxury, promises of wealth, but the only thing they deliver is slavery. They gain their power from the monster. They gain their power from Babylon, that is the system of imperial power. And so this domination system that we talked about in the questions, that transcends geographical boundaries or historical boundaries. It reappears every generation. It reappears again and again in every place and every time period in history. John's readers already know that this system itself gains its power through the dragon, right? That's what chapter 12 was all about. The dragon chases the woman, can't get her, so what does he do? Gives his power to the beast to go around the back door and influence them with wealth and do it that way. So those who are caught up in the battles with this beast do not need to feel like we don't need to feel that we're part of a dangerous confusion that's going on in the world. We are not ignorant and fighting in the darkness, right? We are part of the Lord's victorious army, right? The ones who will conquer the monster in the usual way, which is not by a sword, but by his blood and by the word of our faithful testimony of what the Lamb has done. It has always been that way, and it will always be that way. I would encourage you this morning to conquer by the blood of the Lamb. And if you haven't been washed in that blood, you need to be. I invite you to become a part of the family, to put Christ on like a piece of clothing, it says in Galatians chapter 3, to put him on in baptism. We can help you with that this morning if you need that, or if you need the prayers of the church, we can help you with that. That's the lesson for this morning. We'll look at Revelation chapter 18 next week, the funeral dirge or the funeral song of Babylon.